Growing up in the 90s, I heard a lot about the evils of drugs. Just say no, dare to resist, drugs will scramble your brain.
This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
Illegal drugs are bad news. Don't mess with them.
But as it turns out, my brain was already scrambled. I was 23 when the pain started, paralyzing me for days on end. It felt like a hot poker stabbing my brain. I tried every medication imaginable, but nothing helped. I would have done anything to make it all stop. So when I learned that psychedelics might treat my condition, I was forced to re-examine everything I'd come to believe about drugs. This was especially complicated because I'd always been told that Jews don't do drugs. Judaism takes the mind seriously, and anything that messed with my brain was a deal breaker. But with pain this severe, I had to question my assumptions. Could psychedelic mushrooms actually be kosher? Psychedelics are having a moment right now, but tech bros, hipsters, and psychiatrists didn't invent microdosing. Indigenous communities around the world have practiced spirit medicine for centuries, using substances like peyote, mushrooms, and ayahuasca to heal or transcend. For many indigenous communities, these practices are sacred, connecting humans to the spiritual force that power all life. Jewish people know this force as God. But I didn't set out on this journey as a way to connect to God. My journey started somewhere far more mundane, a conference room in Dallas, where a man named Bob Wald was about to change my life. Bob had suffered from cluster headaches for over 45 years, and he was serious about looking for a cure.
We were all sharing different ideas that we had found on our own that were helpful. Everybody was just finding different little things that might help bring the pain level down from a 10 to a 9.
If you're not familiar with cluster headaches, they probably don't sound like a big deal. Everyone gets headaches, right? Not like this.
People with cluster headaches are actually suffering from something that's called complex post-traumatic stress. They're having this traumatic event 3 times a day, every day, and dealing with suicidal ideation every time.
More than half of the people with cluster headaches regularly think about taking their own lives. Without treatment, many actually do, not just because of the pain, but because your whole life becomes a waiting game. Imagine being in a swimming pool with a great white shark and told he's gonna bite you every so often, but in the meantime, try to enjoy yourself. It's bad. So bad, you'd do anything to stop it. Even something you've been warned against your whole life, even something that might go against your religion. But does using mushrooms to heal cluster headaches go against Judaism?
Look, the Torah does not explicitly refer to shrooms. Torah is very clear of Torah Hashem Tamima, simplicity. Going the simple direction, the simple route is the ideal. Does that mean there's a prohibition on these? That's less clear from the Torah's point of view.
This is what I love about Judaism. There's never just a yes or no answer. There's layers on layers on layers. But there's one thing I know for sure. One thing that's been drummed into me since I was a kid. When it comes to saving a life, almost anything goes. You can break nearly any Jewish law, Shabbat, Kashrut, not fasting on Yom Kippur, whatever, in order to save somebody's life.
It becomes necessary for you. It becomes mitzvah for you. You understand? Because life is above all.
Sometimes it's perfectly clear that someone's life is in immediate danger. But what about cluster headaches? Where does Judaism draw the line between life-threatening condition and one that just makes you feel terrible?
Torah is very liberal, I believe, with medication. It doesn't even need it to be the extent of life-saving measures. Many things which will augment the experience of one's life and the quality of one's life, many occasions are recommended by the Torah.
In other words, my cluster headaches might not have been an immediate threat to my life, but they were definitely ruining my quality of life. And in many cases, improving quality of life is considered life-saving.
If it was for one's psyche, one's overall emotional well-being, cognition, you do it. Whether that's because ultimately you leave that untreated, it leads to something worse, that's unclear. You're not supposed to die over these things. You're supposed to live. God wants you to keep more mitzvot, not less. So as much as you could do to better your life and the quality of your life, there's great space for a lot of different things that one could use. But it has to be something that we know that science has said this is objectively better for a person, It just needs to have validation by medical authorities. That's the critical component.
So what does the science say about using psychedelics for medical conditions? Turns out, that's a hard question to answer for a couple of reasons. The first is that there's so much about the brain that we just don't know.
Like with most medications, it's still a mystery for sure. There's an awful lot of medications that are out there and approved that they don't know why or how. They have an idea of which brain receptors and transmitters are involved, but it's difficult to know exactly why that change, occurs with most medications.
Plus, science is a process, a long, iterative, and often very expensive process. And then there's the whole legal issue. In the United States, psychedelics are considered a Schedule I substance, meaning they have no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Basically, they are very illegal, which can complicate funding for research and clinical trials. But the studies and trials that do exist have shown some very promising results for a variety of conditions. When Bob Wald first approached Harvard to organize a study on the effects of psychedelics on cluster headaches, he learned something very interesting.
The only research going on in psychedelics then that the government was funding was prove how dangerous psychedelics were. So do this study, but then, at the end of the study, it would be like, well, it didn't show that these people, were committing suicide or their post-traumatic stress was made worse. It was actually treated and cured. It was like, we're really sorry about these findings, but this is what the study showed.
In other words, the US government was funding studies hoping to find that psychedelics were harmful. Instead, they found the exact opposite. Psychedelics can benefit people with a wide range of mental, emotional, and physical conditions, including PTSD. In fact, preliminary studies show that psychedelics can mitigate the severity of PTSD, especially if you happen to have a traumatic experience while under the influence. Of course, scientists can induce psychological stress just to monitor people's responses. That would be wildly unethical. But in October of 2023, Israeli scientists were handed a tragic case study that might unlock new insights into psychedelics and PTSD. When Hamas invaded the Nova Music Festival in Israel, many of the young ravers were on something. They had no way to know that their substance of choice would change the way they processed the living nightmare that was about to unfold.
The biggest study, it shows that 75% of the people were on something. Most of them had mixed different substance, but the people that had as less trauma symptoms, the best conditions, are the people that had MDMA during the time of the attack. They have a better results, less symptoms than people that were clean without any substance. And the worst people in the worst condition were on alcohol.
Now, we should take this with a grain of salt. These studies are preliminary, and it's too early to know how long these results will last. I was never diagnosed with PTSD, but psychedelics have given me my life back. Since I started microdosing mushrooms, I haven't had a single attack. Regaining my health was like a spiritual experience for me. I could connect to the world around me, to other people, to God without a constant feeling of dread. Now, I wasn't looking for a spiritual effect, but so many people are looking to connect with a higher power, and they've reported the life-changing spiritual benefits of psychedelics. So I got curious. If I was wrong about using psychedelics for medical purposes, maybe I was wrong about using them for spiritual purposes. Are psychedelics kosher if you're using them to connect to God?
I'm hesitant to say that there's a clear prohibition on this, but I will say that it is not the recommended path that Judaism prescribes for us to arrive at a connection to God. We have a lot of laws and we have a lot of mitzvot that one needs their attention, one needs their consciousness, one needs their focus. Prayer itself, prayer is a very beautiful thing. If one can't see the words in front of them, then they're missing a significant part of prayer. Does that mean that there's no place and space for accessing something inside? Of course there is. There is something beyond prayer. There's meditation. But that meditation comes from introspection, from clearing one's mind from distractions. And it seems to me that that's supposed to arrive from you clearing your mind, from you getting there.
In other words, psychedelics might have a strong spiritual effect, but so do practices like meditation and prayer. The Torah approach is to try those things first, to develop an internal practice that can bring you to a state of transcendence. In fact, when I asked Rav Daniel Katz, who is an expert in Jewish mysticism, he said something very similar.
The Kabbalists have taught for 2,000 years that the root of all inner transformation and the root of all healing in the most powerful way comes from accessing higher states of consciousness within us. That when we close down our lower mind, what the neuroscientists call today the default mode network, then we can access a higher field of divine awareness within us, which is full of love, inner connection, peace, transcendence, and we access our divine nature. And we get flooded with so much light, so much love, that all our fear, all our trauma collapses and releases within us. There are meditation techniques taught for thousands of years of how to do that.
That kind of meditation takes years of practice. Some people don't even know where or how to start connecting with the divine. So they've turned to psychedelics for help. And many have started to turn to Rabbi Zach Kamenetz to guide them on their spiritual journey.
The thing that I hear most often is that psychedelics are somehow a shortcut. And, the thing that I want people to know is even the easy way is hard enough. Yeah, you might, take a pill. That's the short road. But the long road is everything after that, is the integration phase, is making the meaning over weeks and months and years to try to apply the insights, the encounters, the awareness into as many facets of your life as possible. It's never ending.
Rabbi Zach's process is intense.
Jewish people are disproportionately using psychedelics because we don't have a history of prohibition against alcohol and drugs like other religious traditions do. We've wanted to make sure that when people have an opening or a question about their Jewish identity or Jewish practice or how they actually make this Jewishly meaningful, that we've got them. We want to go more upstream to actually be planting these communities of practice, which are ethical, they're accountable, they're legal, and that we are learning how to do this in community. We have medical personnel, we have psychiatrists, we have harm reduction plans, and for specific intentions, for a community that is desperately in need of connection and healing, to do that work in a vulnerable place, in a safe place that is informed and influenced by Jewish tradition.
In other words, Rabbi Zach acknowledges that there's many paths towards spiritual connection with God. For some, it's deep Torah study or prayer or meditation. But he believes that if Jews are going to use psychedelics, they should have a nurturing environment guided by Jewish tradition.
I think we're so disconnected from the ability to shift consciousness, to be in trance states, to go from a mild consciousness to something wild, that you can only take a drug to meet that. And that I think has been maybe one of the greatest losses of the modern period for Jewish people, is that we have meditative techniques, breathing techniques, movement techniques that can bring us into these very subtle or very large states of consciousness. But that's not on the curriculum. That's not on the table in our synagogues, our places of worship, our schools, our rabbinical schools. And I think to our detriment, because I think it has showed our ancestors is that another reality is possible.
In other words, for Rabbi Zach, psychedelics are a means to reconnect with an ancestral tradition that so many of us have lost. But Rabbi Katz reminded me that there are alternative ways to connect, that this wealth of knowledge still exists if you know where to look.
The Torah Jews for thousands of years always knew that we can do that and achieve that without the psychedelics, without the plant medicine. The Torah path is really a path of psychedelic experiences induced from mental mastery from our own tradition. The Jews didn't really use psychedelics or plant medicine, while a lot of wonderful wisdom paths around the world did, because we believe that we could access those states directly ourselves and experience all the healing and transcendent power from it.
We're all looking for the same thing. Whether someone's using shrooms or whether someone turns to prayer, they're trying to have a transcendent experience. They want to have an experience that allows them to go above the things that are holding them back. And that we value. There's no doubt about that. If that's the intention, Judaism does value that. But again, what's the path that will get you there in the cleanest way possible, in the most direct way? The ways of God are simple. They're straightforward. We don't need to complicate things. We don't need to make things over the top. The ideal experience is not this ecstatic experience that one loses themselves in the revelry. It's a result of the mitzvah. It's a result of prayer. It's a result of Torah study.
So, are psychedelics kosher? Well, it's like anything else in Judaism. No one I spoke to gave me a flat out no. That's because Judaism acknowledges that our world is complicated, and each person's approach to the world is layered and unique. Context matters. Intention matters. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to spirituality. Using psychedelics to address a serious medical condition seems pretty kosher. Using psychedelics to connect with God, that's a little murkier. Every rabbi I spoke to reminded me that Judaism offers us other paths to God. The question is whether we are empowered to access it. I probably won't be trying to achieve transcendence with mushrooms anytime soon. I'm just glad my headaches are gone. But I feel so lucky to be part of a living tradition that recognizes that life is complicated, that few things are perfectly black or white, yes or no. Psychedelics might open your mind, but so does Judaism. No mushrooms needed.